You're listening to the Salty Sex Cast with Mariah and friends. Minimize the fear. Expand your awareness.
Welcome back, everyone. It's your favorite host, Mariah. I have a new friend I'm really excited to introduce you all to. So I have Alex Liu here, and he is on a documentary that is going to be coming out very shortly. Depending on when you're listening to this, it might already be out. But Alex, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about this new documentary we really want to tune into.
Well, thank you first for having me. This is an honor and a privilege. I'm a health reporter who made my first documentary about sex education, frankly, because I was tired of, I think my friends were tired of me yelling and screaming about how awful sex education was and wanting to do something about it. So essentially, I cobbled together a few bucks, a small crew, and kind of traveled the country, Canada, kind of asking all the deep, kind of dark, kind of sexual shames I had to different researchers, educators, even a priest, a lot of different people. I ended up talking to my parents about all this, and trying to figure out, like, what did we do with this sexual shame we're all kind of born into? And because it doesn't feel like it's serving me, but I don't know how to handle it. And the result is the documentary.
The result is a wonderful documentary.
Thank you.
I had the privilege of getting like early, I guess, introduction, got to watch it. So, so much of it, I was like, yes, thank you for sharing that. And really cool, all the people you were able to interview on that. But tell me a little bit more about Health Reporter. What does a health reporter do? How did you get started in this area too?
Yeah, so I guess you could say that because I'm gay, the health and sciences were someplace that I was naturally drawn to because it was the only place that could actually help me understand and conceptualize and explain what was going on, because the world around me was telling me that I was wrong. But when it comes to just straight up science and research, like, you can't fudge the data, and the data are clear that people are gay. It's totally a normal, result of biology. It happens in almost every animal species. And I started doing digging there, and I started realizing, oh, this kind of stuff, people know about this. People know about the wide, diverse sexual relationships and identities that people have, but no one is telling them about it. And I kind of started thinking, what wasn't this the point of school? Isn't this the point of education? Isn't this the point that we learn the facts? And you can come to a different value or different idea, but you can see the truth and still decide that's wrong or bad. You're entitled to your opinion, but that fact that people weren't even saying the truth to me just infuriated me. And so that was kind of just and then you slowly realize how much, we're not really, that I didn't have the background and training to understand what does it mean to put together a healthy life, from nutrition to mental health, to exercise, all these things that contribute to a healthy lifestyle. There's a lot of bad information out there, and there's a lot of people out there. I think things are better, but if you look at like Cosmo from the 90s, if you look at
gosh.
like a lot of these
Predatorial.
health magazines, but they're really trying to just sell you something, or they're trying to make you feel bad about yourself. And sexual health is a huge component to how healthy you are, how well you are. And so, I went on a journey to being a health reporter. But a lot of my stories about sex, frankly, were rejected by my editors. They were, and I get it. They have to toe a line. There's the stories I wanted to do about sex, like anal sex, masturbation, all these things that happen that people are doing and enjoying and living wonderful, meaningful, normal lives. It was still too taboo, and so I just started thinking, I'm going to start putting this stuff on YouTube. Fun, things I was learning about, all sorts of different sexual research. And through that, it slowly started crafting into, I started meeting all these cool people. And I'm like, I wish I could just spend a day with them and let people hear what they're telling me, because it's really helping me recontextualize sexual shame and how it's really something that is taught. It's not inherent. And you can, that means you can kind of teach your way out of it too. You can learn your way out of it. So as I was going on this journey, I thought, well, maybe we'll put together a camera crew, put it together. This is now 8 years ago. I was my first day of the shoot. So this has been a long journey. I did not think it would take this long in any way. But what the result is, you see, I have a totally new relationship with my body, with sex, sexual relationships. It takes a long time, but if you work at it a little bit each day, your life can be just so much more meaningful.
Oh, I love that. Work on it each day. That's my next question is, how do you feel like you've changed since before this documentary process to today?
So a lot of people ask me, so do you no longer have sexual shame? Like, are you rid of it?
Oh.
Sorry,
that's
yeah. I was like, no. Like, I will always, you kind of, it's just imprinting. It's the culture you grow up in, the way you were raised, the culture you live in. Like, you will always have that shame and it'll never go away. But I would say how I changed is I recognize it almost immediately. So much of my life I've repressed it. I've ignored it. I've tried to drink it away or take drugs to make it go away, or get into really unhealthy sexual relationships. Deal with it in a really unhealthy way. But now I feel like I recognize it right away. I can name it right away. I can talk to someone about it right away. And that's the best way to kind of get rid of the darkness, is shine light on it. And so, interviews like this, talking to audiences, putting yourself out there, it's terrifying. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes it's just, sometimes you do react in a bad way or a negative way. But it's just so much easier to handle. So I feel like I now at least have the tools to deal with it. And I'm able to now craft a life, a sex life especially, that is fun and it's playful and it's different and new and changing. And it's something that, it's still kind of new. I talk a lot about how it's like learning a new language or being in a new country it's like, you're still kind of figuring it out. You don't know what's going on, but it's exciting. And so that's kind of where I am now.
Yeah. Do you think there were any answers that kind of surprised you that you found along this journey that you were like, I still don't quite agree. I still see it a different way.
Yeah. I think so I was raised Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And so Catholicism comes with its, a whole bunch of baggage when it comes to sex. And so one of the things I knew I wanted to do was talk to a Catholic priest. And so I talked to a Catholic priest in the movie. I specifically chose one who I think it was kind of, he is definitely on the more progressive end of the church, let's say. He's someone who
more open-minded.
He's trying to get the church to change, but I really I went in there being like, you kind of see how this is wrong. So how can you still be a Catholic? How can you still be part of this institution that is causing so much pain for something that is one of the most beautiful, joyous parts of being a human? And I'm still not fully there, but he has a definition of sex that really has changed a lot of how I see the world, and in that sex is not intercourse, it's not penetration, it's this kind of spectrum of human connection and joy and pleasure and love. And in conversations, I think a good way to put it is like, sometimes it is like holding hands with someone you love can be more of a sexual thrill than actually having sex with someone you actually don't care for. It's like thinking about sex in a way that's much more about what is it's just a spiritual side of sex. I'll just put it that kind of that way, that because I've been so, harmed by the church, I've really deadened and numbed that spiritual side, that connection of awe and beauty and wonder that sex can bring. I've really deadened that side of me. And so it is weird and new to kind of think about it in those terms and think about it in terms of seeing kind of sex everywhere, but not sex in the sense of like, intercourse, but sex in the sense of like the beauty of what it means to be a human in connection, in community, all those things. I'm still, as you can tell, I don't really have the words for it yet, but it's kind of like this new awakening in me that I see that I've been so scared so long to express sexuality or to be sexual, sexual. I don't know if that's the best way to put it. But what would the world look like if we got rid of all that sexual shame? How much
Mm.
more, things simple as like a pat on the back, compliment about a person's energy, those types of things that I really have repressed about myself because I'm scared of feeling too sexual. But that is part of the playground, and it is part of the thing that makes life so wonderful. And so what does my life look like if I stop trying to control that? Yeah.
Wow. How incredible. And I love that you shared that, the harmful messages that came from that religious upbringing. Me coming from a Mormon upbringing and having the exact same concerns and disconnecting, shutting off the
Mm,
spiritual side. I mean, as soon as you hear anyone talking about religion, all you can think of is spiritual and not just, spirituality without the religion
right.
or um, part of it, and being able to open that up. That's a huge piece of you. I think spirituality and sexuality, are just baked into absolutely everything, just like, you were just saying. So to be able to connect those two again is really cool for yourself.
Yeah. And I think I now I see so many people out there who I think, I think it's easy sometimes to make fun of, say, politicians or spiritual leaders who are frankly being pretty harmful in their rhetoric, harmful in the policies they put out, and really, really just I can just see how it's affecting someone like me 20 years ago, kids. But then sometimes I think, I instead of rage now, I do kind of feel sadness that this person might never experience kind of the full, spectrum of human joy and pleasure and connection. And focusing on that and thinking about that has been a really much more healthy way than to just be frankly angry.
Yeah. The full spectrum. It's not just the on or off, the black or white. It's
Yes.
just such a spectrum. And I think, anytime you talk about sex or sexuality, people immediately go to like the darkest places they can think
Mhm.
of, the harm that it does do. Which I'm sure if we say religion, a lot of people probably were just there a minute ago, the
Mhm.
darkest places, the harm that it
Mhm.
has created. Um, but really wanting that connection. So part of that documentary, you kind of start and you end with your parents, with your
Yeah.
family, which is really an interesting thing for myself because my parents still don't know about this podcast. It's been going
Oh,
for a few
wow.
years now, and we're over 100 episodes. And so it's just one of those things that still carry that shame, but also really
Mhm.
worried about judgment.
Mhm.
So when you were going to your parents, tell me about like that first interaction to the later interaction, kind of how, maybe that judgment or relief or just different side of that connection.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have talked to me about like, oh, how do I talk to my parents? How, the way you talk to yours, how do you do that? And I have to be clear, um, it's you have to know your parents. It's so different. It's so individual. It's I don't want to say I'm advocating you all of a sudden talk about your sex life with your parents. That was it for me. It was, I think, um I had spoken to so many researchers, sex educators who had just talked about how shame starts really in the home. And
Mhm.
and it's often not something, it's never really intended. It's, your parents, their parents, their parents, their parents. It's just the culture. It's just something that no one has really grown up with being comfortable talking about for such a long time.
Mhm.
Um, and so I didn't necessarily want to talk to my parents about it, but because we were hearing this so much from different educators, my producers, my creative partner, I was like, well, maybe we should talk to your parents about this. I resisted a lot the personal side of the story, in the end, I'm very glad that I was persuaded and I had a very safe set of creative partners. But yeah, it was something where, we had never had to talk about sex. We never really mentioned the word, we never, but at the same time, I knew that there wasn't necessarily going to be any problem, because when I first came out of the closet, their first reaction was, how do we make sure you're okay? So it was a very loving reaction. It was very much a, get you into therapy. Let's meet gay people in the community. Let's show you that there's a future, that this is not something that will end your life, and you can still have a life of meaning. But it's still something, none of us are really comfortable talking about those things. And so, in a way, I feel like it's something we all wanted to talk about, but I needed the artifice or the filter of making a movie, having it deal with work, for us to all actually have that conversation. And we needed some sort of force functioning, a reason to do that. And so, yeah, it was, I mean, we definitely had mimosas before. We got a little loose,
Love that.
The interview in the movie is probably, I don't know, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, but it's a whole like hour and a half of us talking before we get to the real meat. And yeah, I think, it's one of those things where, I'm lucky to have the parents I have. Parents are open, honest, supportive, even if they don't know what's going on or what I'm doing or making this movie that feels controversial, taboo. And I think, it's kind of like, we do that, and then 5 years later we had the end conversation of everything I've learned, everything I've taught, and getting really deep into all the deep, dark shames I think that I had that I could never reveal to my parents. But you don't see that 5 years of slow chipping away of, and I think one of the things people ask, like, how do I talk to my parents? But I'm like, well, you don't dive right in, it's it's like coming out of the closet. When I first came out of the closet, saying the words "I'm gay," I would have vomited before. It was so terrifying. And then you do it over and over and over again to more and more people. You meet people, you have relationships, and then and then now I'm talking to someone I just met about my sex life, right? It happens, but very slowly. And the same thing with my parents. It's little things, where, there's something in the news that maybe is sexual. There's someone you all know that's having an issue. Talk around the issue, and slowly, once you get more and more comfortable saying the word, even just saying the word sex, or saying the word penis, or saying the words, little ways of doing it. It takes a little baby steps, but slowly, it's amazing when you slowly open up to someone. All of a sudden you can talk about your childhood masturbation, and it's something that's actually kind of a joke, and it's funny, and it's something that's not as terrifying as it would have been 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's really cool. So the 5 years span, the slowly chipping away, and that's where it really comes in. This isn't daily growth, it's an intentional setting where you're wanting to grow and to continue that path of sexual enlightenment. I'm just kidding. But curbing the shame and calling it out, I think that's really cool. I'm a mom of 3. My oldest is almost 13.
Okay.
And it's one of those that I'm like, I always picture myself, I'm still the child that I'm like, how do I talk to about my parents? But I was like, I have active young adults in my home. Like, they're asking questions and other things, but it's really funny. I still look at it through the lens of like how I would have appreciated support and things. So, but I'm like, it's going to be very interesting. It's an active social experiment right now on how my kids are going to grow up. And hopefully shame is something that's not nearly as gut wrenching in this area than it was, you expressed the trying to drink it away, even drugs, for me, suicide attempt, self-harm, and absolutely the negative sexual encounters to try to just get away from it when you're really creating more harm.
Right.
So we'll see how that turns out. It's
well, and in a way, it's funny. I first thought I was making this movie for kids, and I kind of was my 13-year-old self, and I think it is kind of, but in the end, it's ended up so much being more about parents, like about the connection between parents and children, and how sad it is that that I disconnected from my parents at such a young age because I was so scared about this aspect of myself. And none of us were equipped with the tools to talk about it in a healthy way. And how many years we wasted just tiptoeing around, disconnecting from our love and our connection, and hiding sides of ourselves from each other, when really there was no need, that ultimately we love each other and we want to be there for each other. But this sexual shame was preventing it. Yeah, I think, life is short. How many more times am I going to see my parents in a year? It's something where, why not know all the things and know them as an actual human being, as an adult? And it's been just a great way, our relationship now feels like we're actually learning new things about each other, which is kind of interesting and strange.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to hear how your work and your bravery to go and explore this has impacted their relationship with one another and their relationship with their own sexuality, just kind of hearing about it from that too. It's always curious, like, okay, if my child can go do this and ask some hard questions and some uncomfortable questions, what am I not doing? Or, I could do it too. So it's just interesting to hear. So I love that you kind of ended again with chatting with your folks and hearing, their side.
Yeah, ultimately the
cute.
solution is having conversations, right? People,
Yeah.
there's no right way. Everyone is individual. I've kind of
Yeah.
learned, I would say before the movie, I would consider myself sex positive, which I still kind of do. But I kind of take a step back now where I'm like, maybe I should just be more neutral. That ultimately, a better way is to be a place where you can listen to someone where they are, no matter where they are. Because, I think in the past, I might have said something like, "Oh, you gotta try anal at least once. You got to do this. Why aren't you haven't lived if but people are different. People are not the same, and wherever they are, it's fine. But what we can all do is be a place where if someone has real questions or struggling with something or just want to talk about their day or how they interact with a person, to be a source of listening is a skill that I'm still trying to develop. Yeah.
That's really beautifully said. Sex neutral is what we're going for, right? I think having that pendulum overswing to like everyone needs to learn about sex and we all have to try all this and you have to all be like really cool with all touching your own body and blah blah
Right.
blah blah blah. But that actually creates shame on the other side of the spectrum
Exactly.
too. But
Exactly.
but I'm still not okay with this. And
Yeah.
I had a friend who was listening to the podcast and she was just like, man, that's great. But like, I stopped listening because it's not really for me because this, and this. And again, it was the shame that came about. And I was like, whoa, that was really eye-opening to hear that
Wow.
experience from her.
Yeah.
So that just helped me realize that, yeah, we can be a little more neutral to be more safe, to actually allow people to then create their own positive messages around sex, not sex positivity, meaning I'm shoving it down your throat. It's more of just I want you to have your own positive journey and positive relationship with sex, whatever that looks like.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
That's something I'm still learning because, my instinct is to it's kind of like a middle finger to, conservatives, but if they're happy that, who am I to judge, yeah.
Right. I only get angry when someone else tries to control how I'm expressing my sexuality.
Exactly.
But I guess we're doing that the other way too, if we're like too much of it and forcing it upon, that brings up sex education in schools. And part of that right now is really heavy. There's so much controversy right now. And in fact, Utah just said no to a bill that was going to have sex education include consent. So there's so many people that were really, really frustrated and really upset about that. But they were also saying no to other things that were in that bill. And so it's really hard. And then it's even harder when everyone who says no says should be on the family, it should be personalized and in the family, but we also aren't being equipped with many tools or resources.
Right. It would be great
in the family.
It would be great if your family was made of nurses and doctors or, health
and
professionals.
Then,
and sure. Yeah. But I think that's a big, and yes, of course, it should start with the family. And that is a given. A parent has complete rights to instill the values of the family into their children, of course. But the problem is that most families are simply not talking about sex in the home. And when they do, it's framed as like the talk, like it's you sit them down. Lucky if it's 30 minutes, it's probably more like 5 minutes. And it's the parent asking the child, like, what questions do you have? When their whole life they've never shown that they're willing to have these difficult, uncomfortable conversations. And so it's really and I used to have a lot of blame and anger for these parents, but I get it. I would probably be the exact same way. If I never had a sex education, if I was still living in a lot of sexual shame,
Mm-hmm.
of course I'd be terrified about what a teacher at my child's school was talking about sex when I can't even talk about it to my child. I'm a lot more empathetic than I was before starting the movie. And in many ways, that's why I think the film is for parents. I want parents to see, it's really not that scary, that we show these sex ed classes with parents and children. I going to these classes, the first time the nurse says like the word masturbation in a room full of kids and parents, I'm like ripping my seat, like, oh, this is nuts. Like they're way too young, but you realize these kids are already thinking about these things, that it's natural for a child to be curious about their body, and they know that some parts of their body feels good, some parts doesn't. They need to understand good touch, bad touch, consent, boundaries, and the only way you get there is with open and honest communication and practice. And so in many ways I feel like, if only parents could get that sex education, we'd be in a much better place. If only a lot of these parents or conservatives or politicians could understand like how much that they don't understand. And if we could frame that conversation of sex ed, it is not to teach your kids how to have sex or what they should do with this thing we call sex. That really sex education is to help families have these conversations. It's to help give people the vocabulary and the practice of having these difficult conversations. In a way, I wonder if that could be a way kind of to break through, because I do think we all want the same thing in the end. We just, again, are living in so much, and myself included, was living in so much ignorance and shame that it's hard to see a path forward.
Well, just even, you were saying your history of being a health reporter, and why that was triggered, that because of your lived experience. And so many people have a lived experience that they had reasoning to choose the choices they have. And so it's really hard if I'm not empathetic towards their lived experience and to the fear of the unknown, because there is a lot of unknown, just like I was saying. My kids are an active experiment right now. I don't know if I can tell you a lot of the research and everything is pointed positively in this direction, but I still can't tell you for sure. And I'm still a very flawed human. So who knows if I'm creating more shame or fear.
I think it all is just communication, that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not know the answers. It's okay to try and fail. But where the real problems come in is when that happens and you don't talk about it, and you don't try to clean it up, or you don't try to talk about how your insecurities or fears, and then problems start to fester from that. Because I think through this process I've learned that people can really get through anything in a relationship together if all the cards are on the table. But if something is being held back, you just can't happen. And so if there's something that's blocking you in your sex life, relationships, whatever it is, doing that really scary, difficult, terrifying work of figuring out what you're afraid of and what you're ashamed of and all that, and bringing it to light, I just can't recommend it enough. It's work, but it really pays off in ways that, the world is so much more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. I have to also, it wasn't just the movie. I have to credit great therapists. I have to credit a lot of great people in my life. But if I have one message from this whole film, it's just talk about it, have these conversations.
So would it be too simplistic to say you are calling for communication education?
I don't think that's too simplistic at all. I think ultimately, That is the key, that we're in as a culture, as
Yes.
Americans. We're so unequipped to talk about these things, to talk about our feelings,
Hmm.
and sexual feelings are such a huge part of our emotional landscape. And that's really the part that we're all afraid of, right? Like, we all know how to have sex. You just go online. It's so easy to know the mechanics of sex now. It's so easy to know how to prevent pregnancy, how to prevent disease, all these things that sex education used to be for, right? But now with the internet, it's that stuff we get. What we don't get is, like, how do we make this sex thing feel good? How do we make this sex thing work for us? How do we make sure that our partners feel good? How do we make sure that, this is a, and if you don't talk about it, I mean, I probably went 10 years never expressing to a partner if something felt bad, which is crazy, right? But I was so concerned about how the performance I was giving, I was so concerned about these things that, yeah, it's really ultimately end like communication, and this is one of the most difficult things to communicate about. So of course we need as much help and practice as possible, and schools are one part, but parents are the other. So it all has to work together in order for it to be successful.
Hmm. I love that. It's such a great call to action, right? We have all the information at our fingertips, but how to apply it is
Yeah,
really what we need support on.
it's so hard. It's even if you're practiced in it and good at it, the second you meet a new person, the second you get into a new interaction, no interaction is the same. It's hard, and to be in the moment, to actually communicate your fears and your feelings, man, that's something that it will take. You'll never get to the point where you feel completely comfortable with that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of discomfort in it.
Yeah.
In our political climate, in the United States, especially, it is so divided.
Mm.
Um, and when first started this podcast, I was like, it's just about sex. I want to, I'm salty from the lack of sex education I had. I really wanted to just explore all the answers that I never got. And then someone came on, they were like, so it's a political podcast. I was like, what about political? And then she was like, you are political for just having that. And so it was really a hard identity, or at least awareness, that it was like
Interesting.
everything I am doing can have a political impact, a ripple effect.
Yeah.
And so, I love even more. I'm definitely going to adopt the sex neutrality, right? Of just, I want that to be a safe place. I don't want it to be, I'm right, you're wrong. I never
Yeah.
wanted it to be like that. I am still a little salty. I
Oh,
am still healing from my own trauma and
oh,
shame.
same.
Um, and I don't want anyone ever to experience that. And I would love to protect more people from that, regardless if it's, one extreme viewpoint or the other. But I feel like we're getting worse and worse before we're getting
Oh,
better and better.
it is very, very, through this whole process, you know, I realized how much I was not listening to the other side, but I was asking them to listen and respect me. It's like this total hypocrisy on my side, and I was,
Mhm.
and the beginning of the film, frankly, it was much angrier. It was much confrontational, antagonistic. I was out to destroy the other side for what they had done
Ooh.
to me.
Mhm.
But quickly you realize, like, oh man, like everyone has it tough. Everyone has it tough about this stuff. It's so complicated. It's so hard, and the last thing someone needs is someone they don't know to tell them that they're wrong and all these things from a life that they have, that in which they haven't really heard from other people. And so became very clear very quickly um, that if I wanted real love, real respect, real understanding from those who maybe hadn't given to me in the past, the only way through was to do the same. And
Mm.
it created these amazing conversations with, like, a Utah state senator, with the Catholic priest, with anti-abortion protesters. It made me realize really that we're all much more similar than we are not, that we all are
Yeah.
looking for this crazy thing called meaning, and how we find that is so different and individual and unique. And the more we can just, again, talk about these things, I think without, it's hard. Don't tell me wrong. It's very hard. One of the hardest things to do is to love someone who you disagree with. But it's if the more we can practice that, really in a weird kind of roundabout way, the better sex will be for all of us. So that's kind of like the one thing I come around to understand, that the only way through is by being just like radically loving and understanding, and that's a challenge.
Hmm. So if you did a part two, a sequel, if you will, what things that either didn't make it into this film, or that you think are worthy of a conversation still in this realm?
Yeah.
What are some things that come up for you?
Well, we joke that the sequel will be called Kink Queer, because we talked to some amazing, kink activists, queer activists, scientists, researchers, educators. One of the most difficult cuts that we had to make was we spent a whole day at a trans healthcare center, where all the doctors are trans and the nurses are trans, and it's the patients are trans. And we quickly, in the editing room, we quickly understood, like, oh man, this could be a whole documentary on its own. You really need so much time to give an issue like gender its due. And so, the one thing I will say from that interview that really got me thinking is, that we spoke to a nurse there, a trans man, who did get surgery, got taking hormones, all that, but he intimated to that he, at this point in his life, he wonders if he would have done all of that if society had just accepted him as he was. There's a lot of the gender debate right now is like, it's too young for these kids to be taking hormones or to be getting surgeries. It's too young for these kids to transition, and it's, how can they be in sports and all this stuff? But I think now, and I had those same concerns. It does seem kind of extreme for kids to go through these very, these life altering, body altering procedures. But then after talking with him, I thought, I've had this all wrong. I flipped it in my head. If I really care about these kids, and I don't want these kids to get surgeries and go through these medical procedures that have inherent risks in them, that, a medical procedure is always risky. The way to stop them from doing that is to create a world in which these kids feel completely loved and accepted in the bodies that they have, and most of us are not doing that. Most of us are not there for these kids in a way that makes them feel loved and beautiful for the bodies they have. And so, that's my retort to a lot of these quote unquote concerned parents. These kids are doing these things because it's the only way that they can probably feel safe in a world that is so hostile to them.
I have to meet your expectations of this gender.
Exactly.
And that creates extreme measures for me to hit that.
And I get that. And so, this nurse basically said, like, if people were okay with a man with breasts taking their shirt off in a beach, I would never have gotten the surgery. But the second I did that, people freaked out to the point where I felt unsafe. So what's the choice? And that really blew my mind. Like, yes, I'll admit, like, if I saw that, 10 years ago, I would have been uncomfortable. I would have wondered what was going on. And now I see that much more as just a part of how I contribute to the sexual shame of others, and how my beauty standards that I've tried to fit and conform to because I wanted to be loved and accepted by society that really didn't let her accept me. All these kind of like, screwed up stuff that you go through, to realize that I'm not uncomfortable with them. I'm uncomfortable with myself. I have a shame in me that is making me try to get this person to fit, because that's what I had to do. And so it's been this whole process where I'm like, okay, I understand now how, that we're all this is all very new, and hopefully though, the work I do can continue to help people to understand and think about, empathize with those perspectives.
It's really, really cool. I hope you get the opportunity to create that next one, because it sounds very fascinating. So where can everyone donate for this next one? But we were talking before we started to hit record, and I said, what else is coming up for you that either didn't make the cut or didn't make it into the movie that is still really worthy of a conversation? Because this is the point that you kind of can pull in, hey, subtext. What are some other things that come up for you that are either, if you aren't able to create a documentary or share messages, that you're hoping someone else does, is worthy of more call to attention?
Yeah, I think the thing that is kind of really, I wish we had time to put in the film is this fear. I think a lot of parents or concerned parents, I think there is some people who are using sex ed as a cynical ploy to divide us and further their kind of demagoguery, which I don't, want to pay too much heed to. But I think there are some concerned parents who, I think in good faith, do not want their kids to be exposed to, sexually graphic images, explicit images in the classroom. They think that porn is being showed. They think, this idea of groomers, right? That teachers are somehow grooming their children to be susceptible to abuse and all these things. And I think the one thing that was difficult for me to wrap my head around, but I understand now, is some research done by some amazing sex educators who their main goal was to prevent that very thing, grooming, sexual abuse. How does this happen? How do we prevent this? And their answer was comprehensive sex education as early as possible. We're talking 2-3 years old.
Yeah.
And the reason is because when they went to prisons and talked to child molesters, they asked, how do you pick your victims? And they pick the victims that clearly are not comfortable talking about their bodies, who are clearly not in conversation with any adults about sex and sexuality, because a child that doesn't know how to talk about these things will never talk about it with an adult. And sex education is the pathway in which these predators have nowhere to hide. It's such a difficult it's such a difficult argument to make, because we have to wade through so much cultural baggage and upbringing. But my message is, if you don't want it in schools, that's fine, but you have to be talking about this in the home earlier than you think, because very early kids are exploring, and very early, I think that the best way to illustrate this is often, and this happened to me, I think, little kids will naturally just touch themselves. They'll explore their body. And then when they touch their genitals, a parent will wipe their hand away. Or they'll talk about elbow, knees, and toes, but skip over a huge part of their body. And kids will pick up so early that this is somehow like a shameful part of their body, a shameful thing to do. So if someone else does, God forbid, touch them in there, they think they've done something wrong. They think they've done something bad. And if they hear from their parents that teaching about these things in school is bad, it will ruin them, it'll make them into perverts or whatever it is, the message they get isn't that somehow they're staying pure and innocent. The message is that if anyone ever talks about this with me or tries to do anything there, this is something that is bad and wrong, and they will never report it. And so I just, it's again, it's such a difficult argument to make, because I get why people are afraid of it. But that's the one thing that I wish, my one message to parents is that your kids are already thinking about these things. They need someone to talk about them. If you have to be there, if you have to talk to a nurse with someone, if you need someone else to be there while you're there, but please have these conversations, because it is the best way to prevent the worst thing happening to your kids.
Absolutely. I mean, arming them with information, and yes, we could talk about this over and over again.
Age appropriate, and that's the thing that's hard
early and
to undertake.
often.
Yes,
too. Just like you were saying, historically, you're thinking like the talk, and it's one and done, and it's really quick, and it's just like, okay, cool, I did it. I can check that off my list and never be uncomfortable again. But often, even, and that's something learning from my kids, and sometimes not even waiting till they're absolutely curious, but gentle probes. Because if they're curious, but they don't know something even exists, how can they be curious?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, my kids are probably armed with a lot more information than other kids. And made a joke or something. And I was like, do you know what that means? Or do you know why that could actually really, really hurt somebody? I know it's a joke for you and the people who identify, that you're around, but somebody else has a seat at that table and they don't get to say anything about that joke. And really talking about that early and often, and looking at it at different viewpoints. You were even saying, kids who do get groomed and predators do try to go look for, because they're probably already ashamed or can't talk to other adults, but they might say something to a friend or another kid.
Mm-hmm.
Am I teaching my own children how to listen to what their friends say? And is that something? And that was a really, really, really hard conversation and a hard lesson that we're still having with my kids and still discovering. My son educated a friend his friend was not prepared for some of that information. And so I said, your job, because you know a lot of things, isn't to educate others, but to maybe give them opportunities to find better information. So it's like, if you hear your friends talking about, a blowjob and they think it's this or that, and it's really not, maybe you could say, hey, you might want to talk to an adult about that one. I don't think you're right.
That's great. I love that. That's amazing.
So to even ask your kids and their friends, hey, how would you help your friend if your friend told you someone touched me or something? I don't know if I've even really prepared my kids, but it just brought that up, because we can still even help our kids be allies and support for them. But I want to put you on the spot. How do you define sex?
So it's a ever evolving definition, but I think at its core, the thing that makes sex is vulnerable, intimate, pleasurable connection. It's that thing when you're in, I've had some conversations that were more sexually charged than being like actually penetrated. It's that thing, and thinking about sex that way, that so much of my thinking about sex is like very like goal oriented. Like I need to get to a point where I'm penetrating something to orgasm. It's like a very like a script, but this other
one
definition,
dimensional.
Exactly. One directional too. But now it's thinking about it in terms of like, what is that thing that the thing that actually makes life so beautiful and wonderful and sexual. It can go so many different ways and so many different directions with almost literally everyone in the world, that it doesn't have to have an actual skin connection, although that's great if that's what you want, and that's thrilling and wonderful, but kind of like we're talking about, it's so much more of a spectrum of, it can be as simple as being there for someone when they're down. It can be as simple as just seeing someone who's sad and telling them some compliment about what they're wearing. It can be just those small intimate connections of people that stick with you for a day, stick with you for a lifetime, whatever it is. But it's really, to me, it's like kind of what we're all made of. I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever, but it's that sex is really what makes the world run in the best possible way. That the connections we make in life, if they're not sexual, then they're not meaningful. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm still trying to figure it out. But it is something where I'm having a lot of fun, kind of reinterpreting a lot of the relationships and people, and it actually makes me think a lot more. Like, I think so much of myself has been deadened to other people. My life has been very heads down and just stick to my lane. But now it's much more around, and even to the point of like, I think I probably have been terrified of straight men for a long time for a lot of different reasons, terrified of my
Mm.
attraction to straight men for a lot of reasons. But now I think, there's something beautiful. Maybe this guy is not into me because he's straight and I'm into him because he's a man. But that's nothing to be scared of. You can still play with that. You can still have fun
Right.
with that. You can still tell this guy he looks beautiful, even if he provided you think it's safe and it's in the right, you've established a relationship, there's trust. There is you can't go too far too fast, but
There's boundaries. Yeah.
yeah, the
Healthy
boundaries, yeah.
boundaries.
But don't be afraid of that, and you can
Yeah.
still have that connection with someone, and it might be sexually charged, maybe more on one end than the other. But it's all part of sex. I don't know. I'm kind of blabbering now, but it's been a part of me that I feel like it's just that spark of connection that, when you feel it, and it's just such a wonderful, joyous part of being alive, and that's kind of where I am with sex now.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of different types of people with different types of relationships, and those who are polyamorous or have an open relationship, they talk about this connection they can have with people that are outside of a sexual relationship, but you can find deeper connections in a
Mhm.
different level. And I just like that all the pressure just falls away when you're like, I'm going to screw that person. That's
Yeah.
a very possible, but I'm not, because I have just went up to the boundary line
Mhm.
instead of just being so afraid and drawing my own
Mhm.
or having it be so black and white. And
Right.
I just was thinking like that there was a very, very specific time in my life. I would not talk one-on-one with another man ever.
Hmm.
And even if it was like a neighbor or a child's, one of my kids' friends' dad, and I was like needed to text or call and be like, hey, so-and-so, your kid. It was so uncomfortable for me to have this
Hmm.
interaction.
Hmm.
And then after I was just like, oh yeah, I need to really let that go. Like that was a piece of shame
Mhm.
that had been instilled for so long that the only interaction I should have with another man is for sexual attention. And so to just be like, no, that was just a permission thing for myself, but it was a
Uh-huh.
really crazy realization. So to hear those other things and to hear what you were saying, it's just, it absolutely, you can still find a level of connection if you're giving yourself permission and to redefine sexuality and how really it does touch everything. It is in
Yeah.
everything. It's baked into
Yeah.
every conversation, every connection.
Hmm.
So it's really, really cool. Where can folks find your movie?
Yeah, so if you go to sexplanation.com, we will have all the links, everything you can do. Follow us on social media, Sexplanation, and you can get the movie. It'll be available on all the major kind of video on demand platforms. And it should be available worldwide, on some things. So if you check our website, the links will be there for your country.
Yeah. Yeah. Because other countries sometimes still have some very strict guidelines.
Yes.
Oh, so exciting. One piece of advice that you'd have for anyone that's listening.
Take the first baby step today. It's again, it's all about baby steps. You can't change overnight. The shame will be there forever, but you can confront it in a way that's healthy. Find that one little thing that you've always thought about and never told anyone. Talk around it. Talk about something you heard on the internet. Talk about this news story you heard. What do you think of this? Find the person, and you'll be surprised. I think it might take a long time. It might require new communities.
Mm,
But you'll be surprised by when you are vulnerable and open in slow, steady ways. How you look back, 1 to 5 years, and how drastically more beautiful your life can be and more open and lovely. And so just have that first tiny little baby step today. Keep at it, and I promise you, life will be just that much better.
that's beautiful. Thank you so much. It's truly a pleasure to get to know you. And
Oh, thank you
thank you
for
so
having
much
me. I
for your
appreciate it.
work
Yeah.
to spread some knowledge and awareness and opportunity for people to have better, healthier connections. So thank you so much. And for
Thank
all of our
you.
listeners, don't forget to follow us on social media. And a huge shout out and thank you to all of our Patreon members. Really, the podcast goes on because of all of you. If you want to donate to the show, become a patron, you can do that at patreon.com/saltysexcast. And like all fun sex things, typically that's behind some type of monitoring. So you do have to do the full address /saltysexcast to find us. Maybe one day we can change the world in their viewpoint and not so much fear and shame around that word, that 3-letter word.
Slowly.
But yes, exactly. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Salty Sex Cast. Ready for round 2? Find us on Facebook.